before we get started, I also wanted to thank my colleague here, Rudy Gonzalez, a fellow UTEP student, who is going to be helping me keep track of time and make sure that our speakers stay on their time limits. So let me start with some quick student introductions so you all can know who's on the stage and who is speaking tonight. Representing the College Republicans at the table to my direct right, we have Lorenzo Villa, who's a political science senior. We have Freddie Marmolejo, a senior psychology major, and Rudy Sutter, a senior political science major. Welcome. And representing the libertarian perspective, we have Isabel Gonzalez. She received her BS in psychology from UTEP in 2011 and working on her master's in rehabilitation. We have James Peinado, who studied political and military science at Texas A&M and currently taking courses in reading here at UTEP. And Rudy Alarcon, a senior major majoring in media advertising. So help me welcome Rudy there. So as I mentioned, my role as moderator is to pose the questions to the students and to help keep time, make sure that no group is overrepresented more than another. The questions that you're going to hear tonight were all prepared by the students, and they've had the chance to review them and prepare their remarks. Of course, audience questions will be new to them, and so they'll be thinking a bit more on their feet as well. To set the tone for the evening, why don't we pose one general question, and we'll hear responses from all of our student speakers. The remaining questions will be targeted to one speaker at a time, but to really set the tone and understand the perspectives coming from the libertarians and the Republicans, why don't we pose one question, and we'll start maybe down at the far end of the stage and work our way this way. We're going to stick to a tight 30-second time limit for this one quick response. The question is, what is the proper role of government? So why don't we start down at the far end and we'll work our way this way. Again, 30 seconds, folks. Thank you.
Well, if you look at the U.S. Constitution, I see that as our strategy in achieving what we hope to achieve in government. But I look to the Declaration of Independence as the goal set out for what we hope to accomplish in government. And so just with that line, protecting life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, to me, that's what the goals of government is. And we need to be very strict in adhering to that and not going any further out of line. So we should protect life, and we need a regulated militia or a military in times of a war. Police and sheriff's departments to protect people from violent crime and enforcing contract rights. As far as liberty goes, though, I think it should not be forgotten that at any time when government goes over, trespasses upon the people's liberty, those government entities, institutions need to be held accountable. And in cases of like the CIA or the FDA, when they supersede on people's liberties, those organizations need to be cut their funding and, either start over from the beginning or just get rid of them altogether.
There's time. Rudy?
Okay. Much like my colleague here, James, I believe in the Constitution. I believe the role of government should be limited to that Constitution. Ideally, though, personally, I believe that government should have two primary functions, and that is to play the role of the protectorate, protect civil liberties, rights, and other things for individuals, and also to provide for public goods. Not necessarily do what is good for the public and provide that directly, but to provide for the public goods. For example, national defense, that is something allowed in the Constitution and is good for the general public.
Thank you. Isabel?
Well, I'm a strong advocate for limited government because I believe it provides the most freedom for all individuals. And it's important to distinguish between federal government and state government. So according to the Constitution, the role of the federal government is to protect our life, our liberty, and our property, as was said earlier. But acknowledging the fact that other problems will arise aside from life, liberty, and property, we need state, local governments, and that's when the state comes in and, according to the Constitution, violent crimes are delegated to the states. So death penalties, murder, things like that are delegated. It's better to just provide it towards the government that the people have better access to, like El Paso County, the state of Texas in our situation. So that's the type of role I think government should play in general.
All right, let's hear from the College Republicans.
assistance, both, you know, from foreign and domestic threats to helping us out when the common citizen needs help, through welfare, through helping each other out. You know, for me, government should be there to help out, but should not impose itself upon your day-to-day life. Whatever you decide to do between you and your family in your own home, that should be your decision. It shouldn't be the government to impose their I guess, laws on you on that part.
My view on what the government should do in respect to the civil liberties that we all here enjoy, including our freedom of speech, to our freedom of religion, where we can see in the news recently where Catholic institutions are now having to pay for contraception. And it's important for the government to enforce the rights that we have that are listed in the Bill of Rights and other amendments. And it is important that they can realize that which rights that are not so enumerated when they arise.
Hi, thanks. First of all, thank you all for coming. And I believe that the role of government in our current situation should be to promote the economy. To promote the economy in the way of creating jobs, of providing better ways for us to be able to tax income on people so that we can provide the services that we all use and need. By providing better regulations but not affordable, like the Affordable Health Care Act is a very bad idea, but we can help the medical field through providing lower costs and providing legislation that makes the medical services more accessible to seniors. And that's what I think the role of government should be right now.
Okay, thank you all. So we're going to move on to our first prepared question. What we'll do in this section is hear 2 minutes from one party, 2 minutes from the other party, and then have an open discussion where they can address each other's points and pose questions. So this time, why don't we start with the Republicans? And your question is, what role should government play in economic policy? And you've got 2 minutes.
Well, I think the important thing that we have forgotten as of late is that the government should not be in the business of picking winners and losers. That is the purpose of the private industry, not the public industry. So spending billions of dollars, I believe the most recent number for the green company, Solyndra, is $849 million of our tax dollars that could have gone to education, etc. But no, the government's trying to pick its winners and losers. The next important thing for the government to do is it needs to limit itself, because when government overreaches, you can't build that. And a great example of that is I have a very good friend, and his family owns business in town, and the government, the city of El Paso, refused to help them build a road to their business. So he was quite vocal with the recent gaffe, you may call it, from President Obama about you didn't build that. So it is important that the government facilitates the free market, but at the same time, it doesn't overreach into the free market and start bailing out companies that don't need to be bailed out. GM did not need to be bailed out. They should have gone through a managed bankruptcy. And just like American Airlines is doing right now, and many other companies go through every year. And I've done.
Okay, so libertarians, your 2-minute response to what is the proper role of government in economic policy?
Okay, so this goes back to my previous answer that I think the most freedom for all is through limited government, and this is also applicable in economic policy. So I think the only role of the federal government should be to enforce contracts between parties who are doing business with one another, prevent fraud, protect property rights, and the rest to stay out of the way of the free market. And I know that sounds very like a very simple to answer, but for example, I'll give you an example of how capitalism actually helps provide added value to our society. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with Whole Foods. John Mackey, the co-founder and co-CEO of Whole Foods, is actually he's an advocate for capitalism because he sees how it's allowed him to add value to our society. He's done this through creating wealth for his wealth for his stockholders, his stakeholders, but he's also produced value for his customers. People get to eat healthier, people have the option to look at, different products in the store. His employees, he says that he's not only created jobs for them, but he's provided them with skills that they can take on to other jobs or just implement in their lives. So it's very important to distinguish between capitalism and crony capitalism. Free market capitalism, it goes back to what Louis was saying, you don't pick the winners and the losers. If somebody fails, they fail, and in the future, they're going to take into account, maybe I shouldn't have done this because this is why my business failed, as opposed to someone who would be more, they would be a lot more conscious in making their decisions, and they wouldn't be unethical, because usually when you're very greedy about things, you're going to end up failing in the long run. So I think that you should look into the Whole Foods co-founder. He explains it very well, and it's in a book called Morality of Capitalism.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Republican. Would you like to rebut?
Well, I would like to start off something really quick, and I think it's extremely important why political discourse is important among us. And I don't know how many of y'all saw the Republican National Convention, but Clint Eastwood was up there debating an empty chair. So I believe I can relate to Clint Eastwood tonight. So besides that, it goes back, you're going to see a lot of similarities between the college Republicans and the Young Americans for Liberty. There's differences, but you'll see a lot of similarities. And one of the main ones is that we need to stop picking the winners and losers. My father used to own a small business. It failed. He didn't deserve a bailout. It failed. And it is important that we realize that, because this country was built on success, but also on failure. And we learn from our mistakes. GM could have learned that they should not have perhaps given the unions so much control in the production of their automobiles. And now the unions have just as much power as they had prior to 2008.
Libertarians care to respond to that?
Okay, so let's find some differences so we can talk about what we're doing. It's true. Traditional conservatives, like today's conservatives, and or there's a word for it that came up in the 70s, neoconservatives or just regular conservatives, have started to defer a little bit in economics, but they definitely have a lot more in common than these two groups and, say, liberals. But let's say if we can find something where there's a difference. I think we both kind of acknowledge crony capitalism, but to me, I think it's another word for fascism. I define fascism as a sort of unholy partnership between public and private entities. And when we talk about the fact that crony government chooses winners and losers, it's just saying that, you had a contract bid, but people who had unfair access to influence the government was able to get their foot in the door and lobby. And there's nothing wrong with lobbying, but just being able to point out fascism where it exists, or crony capitalism. And when you see it, call them on it, and then hold those people allowing such things to occur, hold them accountable. And as citizens, spread the word and let people know, and try to get those people removed. And then socialism. When you see it, identify it. We can call it nice things. We can also say state capitalism. But if you see socialism and you can identify how it's wrong, like the Health Care Act, I think they said it was Article 1, Section 8, the government has the right to regulate commerce. But what they don't have the right is to mandate that people take part in commerce. So that's not okay. So where do we disagree? Federal Reserve and gold standard. That's something where I think libertarians and conservatives today have had a little bit of difference. I don't know. There's something known as commodity currencies where you trade in things of value. So I trade a car for a house, anything. That's bartering. But then there's something where we start to replace things of value with a symbolic paper, fiduciary currency. And we had it, and that fiduciary was backed in gold. But then in the 70s or the 60s, I forget. It was the 70s, we started to go to a completely fiat currency. And so the value of the dollar has decreased in value like 96%. So what was $1 in 1900 is now worth 4 cents today. So it's just crazy. And the Federal Reserve is just something that was illegally passed in 1916, and not all the Senate was there. So it's just crazy that it exists. And the Article 1, Section 8 lets the government have the authority to print currency, and they can. We think it should be backed by gold, but they have the authority to do that. What's funny to me is that the Federal Reserve is a bunch of private banks with the name Federal Reserve, so it's ironic, and we pay interest we allow them to print money, and they don't have to invest anything to print this fake money that's fiat. And so we allow them to do it, and then we borrow money from these banks that didn't have to do anything to print this money. We borrow this money, and then your social income tax, all that goes toward is just paying debt on the interest. I think that's just ironic, and that's just something that libertarians have really been trying to make people aware of. And if you want to learn more about this, go on YouTube. It's an amazing source of information. And look at America, Freedom to Fascism. It's an excellent video. It talks about these issues in much more detail. But that's the outline of the thing.
Sure.
I'm glad James brought up the Federal Reserve. I think briefly here he kind of summed it up, but I just want to say, because it was a contract between the government and a private bank, because it is a private bank. The goal established for the Federal Reserve was to maximize employment, keep prices stable, and to moderate long-term interest rates. So that's why you often hear, if you do hear it in the news, the Federal Reserve is artificially keeping interest rates low. That's what's happening, and it contributed to the housing bubble that occurred a few years ago. So for me, this is a perfect example. When government tries to help, and I really do believe they're trying to help, they actually make things worse. And it's difficult to actually see that when, it's the pretty terms like, oh, the Federal Reserve, we need it as a backup, what do they say? Just, to bail out. I mean, they're the reason that we bail out companies, and this is a lot of crony capitalism because of the Federal Reserve. So I just wanted to add that in there.
Thank you. Republicans, go to Sean.
I just want to go back to the initial quick question, which was what's the proper role of government in economic policy? And I just want to note that we currently are under a Democratic president, and I believe that the current policies that are in place don't work, and they haven't worked for the last 4 years, and even beyond that, into Bush's presidency. Right now, corporate tax is at 35%. The average household tax went up by 5% in America. And that's something that we can't keep doing, because if we keep doing that, we're taxing people on money that they're not earning.
Okay.
Sure. Another important thing to note is the sense that taxing the, whether it's the $250,000 or above, or it's $1 million, as Joe Biden likes to say, I don't know, they probably should figure that out, but if you tax every person, every United States citizen 100%, you're not going to pay for the debt. And that is an important thing to remember when clamoring for higher taxes for those who are more wealthy, aka the 1%. And another important thing to realize is that when you raise taxes, which many of these places are small businesses, they cannot hire more people. And I know that might sound like, the typical line from a Republican, but again, going back to my good friend, or going back to my father's business, when he had to pay higher taxes, that was less productivity he could produce by hiring another person. You'll make more money with more people who are working for you. And that's just the way it works. So by raising taxes, it does cost people jobs. And by lowering taxes, it does help create them.
Thank you all. So let's move on here. We talked about economic policy. The question up next is, what should the role be of U.S. foreign policy in the 21st century? And on this one, we'll start with the libertarians. 2 minutes.
Okay, so there's some differences here. I've got 5 bullet points. I've got 2 minutes to knock them out. Let's see what we can do. I think the big thing is, I studied a lot of international affairs in my time, and I truly do try to take a look at the entire scope of U.S. history in foreign policy. And I think it's important to start with history because if you don't study history, you're doomed to repeat the mistakes you made in the past. And so, I mean, I look at Iran and I look at all the involvement in their internal affairs that we did, and it's so responsible for the headaches that we have today. Same thing goes with Israel and the Middle East and Afghanistan. Mexico, we create the problems that we have going on with our relations with Mexico ourselves, and if we were able to fix our foreign policy, these problems would go away. Same thing with China. The biggest threat to American security is not terrorism, it's definitely the debt. It's something that puts our sovereignty in question, and that's something that I'm much more afraid of than anything else. I also look at the 19th century and the 1800s, what we did to the Native Americans, and I think about that because I think it's important not to forget the shame that we did do, things that we did wrong. Not so that we go on an apology tour, but just so that we don't repeat the mistakes again. And I know that there's something about American exceptionalism that I hear a lot, and I love America, and I think that the creation of the United States and the creation of Texas was like one of the coolest, awesomest things in mankind. But to have a blind belief that America is exceptional and to ignore the mistakes that we've done is to be dishonest with yourself, and we as a nation will not grow if we continue to do so. So I say get rid of the idea of American exceptionalism, and a patriot does question the things that his government does wrong. And so, and then there's a lot of founding fathers, like my foreign policy, I've got experts that back me up. I've got people in the CIA, talk about blowback, am I done?
Yeah.
Oh man.
Flies by. Okay, Republicans, your 2-minute response. What should be the role of U.S. foreign policy in the 21st century?
Well, it's kind of cliche, but I always go back to it because I think it's extremely relevant. And it is a quote from a movie, Spider-Man, I'm sure some of you have seen it. And that quote is from Uncle Ben when he says, with great power comes great responsibility.
Jesus Christ.
And that's very true with America, because we have gained this great power, and it is important for us to make sure that injustices do not occur or can occur. And where I'm leading to that is, in the 1930s, when Will Chamberlain declared he created a great piece of our time by allowing Adolf Hitler to we gave him basically Czechoslovakia, and we appeased him. And I think we know how World War II ended up.
With me, I'm a former military, I do soldier service for 6 years. I traveled, I didn't just study, but I only studied, but I also did, I traveled. And this is what I did see. America, we do have responsibility. We are what most nations generally emulate, but our democratic ways. The tyranny that's going on over there in the Middle East, honestly, is horrific. A lot of people can see YouTube, a lot of people see all stuff, but so you're there on the ground and you see people suffering, you see people that are hurting, and you need to help them out. I think that's where we should be at. We should help Israel. I think that should be a good priority. A lot of people don't think we should be getting involved with that, but I think it's something that we should always be a part of. Same thing we have, the thing in Mexico, the whole Fast and Furious thing. That was a big mistake on Democrats. That was a big mistake on, laying guns, laying all that kind of stuff. Come on, seriously, why send guns to Mexico? Track serial numbers when it's not that hard. Where do you think they're going to end up? In the hands of criminals. And lastly, the main thing for me is America needs to be the world protector, because that's our responsibility. Not just as a soldier, not as a citizen.
Libertarians.
All right, so I believe in America. I believe the principles and the values that America stands for, and I do think that someday I believe in leadership. But something I learned about leadership, if America wants to be the leader in the 21st century as far as foreign policy is concerned, something I learned about when I didn't join the military, I tried to, but I did go to Officer Candidate School and studied a lot about leadership, military leadership. The most important lesson I learned was ductus exemplo, which is Latin for lead by example, set the example. And there's 4 tools of foreign policy, all right? There's going to war, which should be a last resort, but then there's also economics, opening trade, embargoes and stuff like that is another tool of foreign policy. Then there's diplomacy. Diplomacy is great. Diplomacy is what we should be using. But at the end of the day, diplomacy is talk. What's way more important is the last tool, is just our actions. We're taking a holistic scope of our actions. And do they reflect our values? And what are our values? Our values are a free market, free trade. Our values are being open to discussion and debate. So being able to talk openly with people, those are the things that, so when we shut off debate with Cuba or Iran or something like that, that's something that does not reflect our values and we're not leading by example. And then, you know, with Iraq, totally unjustified. I know people on the other table agree with me and some don't. I don't know. But we were a bully there, so we were not leading by example. And if you really want to change countries like Iran or North Korea or China or any other countries you want to influence, if you don't start by leading by example, then you're doomed to fail from there. And I started with history, and I look at the history of all that stuff, and I see that there are several occasions where we have not led by example and did not reflect our values and principles, and we need to look back at that, recognize it, and change our foreign policy so that it does reflect what we stand for.
All right, go ahead.
All right, with Iran, honestly, like it said last night, they are 4 years away from a nuclear weapon. They are 4 years closer. That means have we done embargoes? Yes. Have we tried to do talks? Yes. That president does not want to talk. This guy does not want to reason. It's getting to the point where there's going to be a decision that has to be made in the next coming years of what's going to be done with Iran. Now, I don't know what's going to happen. Their supporters are not our supporters. So, all this is, we can talk all day, we can reason, we can do all we want. At the end of the day, blood will be shed on that with Iran. I know nobody wants to hear that, but that's the reality of war. That's the reality of what's going on in the world. Iran is happening. If you don't believe me, go to YouTube, go to MSNBC, go to Fox, go to CNN. You'll see it. It's happening. It's going to happen. Just be prepared for it.
And the comments from my good friend James, you know, it's kind of sounded to me similar to what President Obama was going around saying about how we dictate to the world. And I strongly disagree with that. As Governor Romney said last night, we do not dictate to the world. We free the world from dictators. And I know he's going to come back and say right now, well, we implanted dictators, and we supported dictators. And, you know, see, I know him well, right? But the important thing to know is that a lot of these countries, leading by example, it doesn't work for them. They look at us and say, oh, you're not going to bomb us? Okay, well, let's go spend those centrifuges. And that's just how it works. And something to keep in mind is a lot of these countries, you know, like we look at Afghanistan, the Taliban, these people they don't negotiate. It's their way or the highway. If they negotiated, they probably wouldn't be still fighting. And that's something to remember.
I know you're chomping at the bit. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Tony, for your service to this country, as well as any other veterans in the audience here tonight. I really, yes. I vehemently disagree with everything that y'all are saying right now. Yeah, lead by example. I don't know, I thought it was Jesus that said, blessed are the peacemakers. I don't see why we have to be fear-mongering all the time, constantly trying to go off and telling people that, you know, there will be bloodshed on the streets tomorrow if we do nothing about Iran. We've been involved in Iran since, what, 1953. We implemented, like you said, a dictator, the Shah. Our actions there directly led to the Muslim revolution out there in Iran. It's blowback. I mean, our actions have consequences, and I mean, like this is an area where Democrats and Republicans now agree. I mean, for the past decade now, you know, we've had a large anti-war movement going up against Iraq, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan at some point. And I mean, now we see both parties in power now. They've both gone out and conducted wars. You see Obama now, he's done more drone strikes than any other president. I mean, George Bush, he started it, Obama took it to a whole new level. In fact, he even did a drone strike against an American citizen and his son, I believe, right? 16-year-old son. I mean, if Obama can go out and do that, what is Romney going to do? What are the fear-mongering Republicans going to do? I mean, it's just, I find it hard to go out and have a message of total war, and I'd like to see more peaceful there.
Quick closing thoughts on this?
I'd like to address the accusation about the drone strikes. Tony, I'm sure this is a question you answered. If you renounce your U.S. citizenship, are you a U.S. citizen?
Not only that, but the moment that all the soldiers take the oath, if you can defend the country from both foreign and domestic terrorists, that man was no longer an American citizen. Even though if he had anything against the United States, he became a homeland terrorist.
And that's an important thing to remember. This was not some person who was speaking out against the government. This was someone who was not only inspiring, but planning to kill people. So yes, there are some issues where we agree with libertarians on, and some issues we agree with the president on. But another thing to remember is that the Cold War was a very, very difficult time in new territory for our fathers, basically. And, you know, it goes back to the whole sins of our fathers. And it is regrettable that what happened, but what will be the blowback of not doing anything is an important question to ask. And it's not a question we can answer, but it's an important question to ask.
Closing thoughts? Libertarians?
Yeah, rebuttal. Okay, this militarism, we're going to it way too fast. We resort to it way too fast. And I talked a bit about liberty, and the government's job is to, we're worried about security of our nation, and we're forgetting about our liberties. And when you forget about that, then something needs to be done about it. So you've got the Patriot Act and the NDAA and all these other things where we're willing to kill American citizens without trial, habeas corpus and stuff like that. You're losing who you are. And so that's why we need to look back at it. Plus all this militarism is like corporate welfare, because you said something about Israel. It's just these military industries, they lobby for these things just so that they can create more bombs and jets and stuff like that. And I believe for having a strong national defense, but I believe in sizing it down in times of peace, and we're resorting to the militarism went far too easily. We need to lead by.
Can I have 30 seconds?
30 seconds.
The whole thing about sizing down the military in a time of peace, we've tried that, and every time we do it, we're going to have to spend about triple to build it back up again. We saw that from the 90 demilitarization to the 2003, and in order to successfully, of course, we can argue about whether it was right or wrong, but to invade Iraq with a sufficient force, we had to spend lots of money to build that force back up again.
Okay, 30 seconds.
I just want to say that we need to look at history, as James was saying. In times of fear, in times of war, people are more willing to give up their freedom and their liberties, and that's exactly what's happening right now. So maybe it's not necessarily the government trying to do that to us, but who's to say a future president won't use the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, which basically takes away our right to a trial, and we would be imprisoned we'd be sent to a foreign prison without a trial. You know, and it's if you're a threat. So my question is, who determines if you're a threat? The president? Congress? You know, I just think it's subjective and it's dangerous, and we need to at least look at that.
Thank you all.
We're broke.
Let's move on to a question back on domestic policy. Sorry. No, we're out of time. Yeah, we'll move on. We have a question now on domestic policy. What is your opinion on the war on drugs? Have the government's policies been effective? We'll start off with the Republican.
The war on drugs was a well-intentioned operation, and it is tragic that it has not made more progress than what it has. But an important thing to realize is that although this might not be the answer, legalization is not the answer either. The big thing right now is the legalization of marijuana. And although I do agree that we should, as a human being, be able to choose what we put into our body, at the same time, you know, do we really need another illicit substance that can impair someone who doesn't make good decisions to begin with to be driving on the road? Yeah, I mean, stone drivers, no thank you. But no, the war on drugs has not been an effective cause. And I have 1 minute left. And it is it's one of those things that, again, we had good intentions of doing it, but just the sheer amount of will behind the cartels, et cetera, the demand, it's extreme. I mean, the United States of America consumes oil like no other and drugs like no other. And an important thing that we need to begin to do is, instead of doing this sort of war on drugs, is to help people get off drugs and help people rehabilitate themselves, which you can all see in the Republican, what is it? The Republican Party platform, and that's in there as of Tampa. And
Okay, libertarians, 2 minutes.
Okay, well, I think my opposition is admitting that it's a failure, even though he thinks that it should still be stopped. I got a little bit of inconsistency from his answer, and I wasn't going to mention candidates in this debate at all, but they keep bringing up Obama and Romney's name and stuff like that. I see hypocrites and stuff like that. The war on drugs has been an absolute failure. It's been an absolute failure. We have the same number of people that were addicted on drugs in the 1970s as we do today, if not more, and the amount of money spent on it has quadrupled. Prohibition is a failure. We tried it in the 1920s, and for some reason that didn't work, but we thought it would work with marijuana. The reasons for making marijuana illegal in the first place, and I talk about marijuana so much because that's where the majority of the enforcement is concentrated on, is marijuana. They said that it was something, they said it caused laziness, and that's been proven to be false. They said it's a gateway drug, and I have reasons to show why it's not a gateway drug. They say that it causes cancer, and in fact, it's one of the most medically miraculous plants. It is like probably the most miraculous medical plant known to man. It can help with nausea, sleep depravity, depression, pain, epilepsy, glaucoma, multiple sclerosis. There's countless medical conditions, and pharmacists could prescribe just saying, hey, why don't you just try some marijuana and I'll take care of all your conditions, or they can prescribe 5 different drugs. And that goes to another thing. It's fascism. There's these industries, we call them complexes. There's the pharmaceutical industrial complex, the prison industrial complex, and the marijuana enforcement industrial complex. There are people that stand to lose financially if we were to legalize marijuana. And that is, I see it and identify it as a form of fascism. They're picking winners and losers. Also, the clothing industry and the paper making industry would stand to lose if we legalize this drug. I say we legalize marijuana outright. And I'm a Boy Scout. I grew up as a Boy Scout and stuff like that. I'm an upstanding citizen. I don't believe in doing these drugs, but I also think that I see the absurdity, and I think we should legalize it. And then with hard drugs, decriminalize it. Don't send people to prison for doing heroin and cocaine. They were not harming other people, they were harming themselves. And it's a very addictive drug, so don't put them in prison where they'll learn more bad habits. Put them in a treatment center, which I think we agreed on.
Well, he's saying that these things don't hurt anybody, but what about the people, the drug users hurt themselves? Basically he's saying that let me know if I'm putting words in your mouth, I'm sure you will, is that, if you put it in your body, that's your business, done. Is that basically what you're saying?
I've started studying it, and I recognize that marijuana is helpful to your body, not harmful, and I recognize
yes
that
or no, please?
the hard drug, okay, yes and no, because the hard drugs, you're selling yourself into slavery. They shouldn't go to prison, they should go to a treatment center.
Okay. But what happens when, let's say, John has shot himself up full of heroin and he decides he wants a Big Mac? When he gets behind the wheel, he is now behind, he's a death machine because he is not sober enough to make the right, I'm glad that was fun. He's not sober enough to make the decisions, the right judgment calls. And I think the important thing to do, I think something that we can both agree on, is that not necessarily go after people who use marijuana. I disagree on the harder drugs, but go after people, help rehabilitate them, and then go after the people who are selling the heroin, the cocaine, the ecstasy, when you don't know what's in it, et cetera, et cetera. You have something to add to me?
The prison times that are, some of those drug users are sentenced to, they're deterrents. The reason that they use prison time is because there are studies that have proven that rehabilitation does not work in some cases. In some cases, I'm not saying all, we'll come back with something on that. But it's necessary to use sometimes taking the freedom away so that people can understand that the drugs that they're using, it's fine if you want to use them, but you can't cause harm to somebody by using certain substances. We see it all the time with the legalization of alcohol. Drunk driving accidents went up. Right now we have record high drunk driving accidents in Texas. It's been proven that legalizing the substance doesn't necessarily make it safe. Maybe the taxing increase would be a huge benefit to us right now, but it doesn't outweigh the mortality that it can cause to other people, innocent victims.
Good news on the taxes though. Texas's need raise taxes were up about $3.5 billion in tax revenue. Just let you guys know that.
Thanks for that.
Of course.
So they bring up, he mentioned, yeah, sure, some drug addictions are very bad, and some people unfortunately do lose their lives to these very addictive drugs. Where I'm coming from is a rehabilitation counselor perspective. Rehabilitation counseling looks at psychiatric disabilities, addictions. We're treating these people and their illnesses. Addiction is an illness, and it's very unfortunate, it's sad, and we're treating them like criminals. I think that there should be at least some way we can provide them with options, going to rehab, give them that option. Don't treat them like a criminal off the bat, because we're also putting them in jail, and when they come out and they want to go back to the workforce, it's hard to find them a job. Nobody wants to hire someone who went to prison. So we're just setting them up for failure. Why don't we allow them a chance to get back up on their feet instead of treating them like criminals? That being said, James mentioned earlier, the fact that marijuana is illegal, the fact that drugs are illegal, no one stops using them. So why are we creating a black market? The fact that drugs are illegal is actually making it more dangerous, and that's why there's so much violence in Mexico. Mexico gets so much money from bringing over marijuana, and if we really want to help our neighbor, we're going to legalize at least marijuana, and then at least start looking at these other hard drugs. At least me in high school, no one ever came up to me and handed me alcohol, because it's legal and it's regulated and people ID you, and there's nobody outside in the back alley trying to sell you alcohol because it's dumb, right? So, someone did come up to me in high school and handed me drugs. They're like, do you want this? And I'm like, no. So, it's easier for young people who are not 18 or 21 to get their hands on these drugs, because who's selling it to them? Thugs, people who don't care about the law. So why don't we make it legal, and it's safer, less people become addicted at younger ages, because that's also a major factor to people who can't overcome their addiction, the fact that they start younger.
Final thoughts on this question?
For the record, I have been in the back alley and I was offered to buy some moonshine. Just throwing that out there. Hey, Missouri. Anyway, but the important thing that goes back to is, okay, so if we decriminalize it, then we'll make it illegal for them to drive while they're intoxicated with the substance. And then they're going to have the same stigma as they did before. Because if you look at it right now, if you have a DWI, it's going to be a little more difficult for you to get a job. I believe you have.
I just want to add that decriminal. What you're saying, somebody who gets high and decides that he hates his wife and shoots her should just get a slap on the hand, right? He was high.
Never happened.
So you're saying violence related to marijuana doesn't happen?
Alcohol is causing violence. If you want to know about a man who's white, alcohol. Marijuana does not cause really violence.
I have about 6 cousins in Mexico that would disagree with you, so.
And also, isn't alcohol and marijuana both depressants?
Marijuana is actually beneficial to people. It helps with insomnia. I mean, James already went through all this. Alcohol, I think we all know. I mean,
Well, not everything that
21,
comes from
right?
the ground is
You know,
beneficial to
alcohol
health.
actually does harm you. It does physical harm to your body, and you become addicted to alcohol.
But on that same coin, you know, I forget which part of Italy, but people who drink a glass of red wine a day are just as healthy. And they're healthier than normal people. But we're not talking about moderation.
We're talking about preventing them.
Okay, with marijuana, you cannot overdose on marijuana. They've done tests. They've had,
And can we know where those tests came from?
there's doctors that you can cite. I mean, Dr. Abrams of
doctors?
San Francisco
Which
University. Okay, I'll give you, no, you don't need a name. You know 6 people in Mexico. I know doctors. Dr.
I know 10 doctors that say the opposite.
Okay, I will send you an article I read this morning. 300 doctors in
But what's the
Colorado
article
are
gonna do for the
backing
audience?
Amendment 64. There's 300 doctors in Colorado. They're trying to pass Amendment 64, which would legalize marijuana in Colorado.
Is
And
it
there's
legalize it or make it available for medicinal purposes? Okay.
right. So well, there's 300 doctors in that state who would disagree with you guys about
But how
the
many doctors
benefits of
agree with us?
marijuana.
All right, folks, we're going to move on to the next question. But first, the audience, if you'd like, if you go to the mic here and pose your question. We need to take questions after the mic. Any questions from the audience? Either side.
Any questions for the Democrats?
Okay, first question.
Since the lefties are not represented tonight, I have a whole list here, but let me choose one. Okay, well, I think I know where the Republicans stand on this, but less familiar with the libertarian view. As far as economic policy goes, and the role of small government, or a small government role, does that include the free movement of labor? So it's kind of an immigration issue as well, but I mean, we know we have free movement of capital, investing wherever we want, people investing in the US, us investing elsewhere. Do you also believe in the free movement of labor?
Okay, so let's do 2 minutes libertarians first.
Absolutely. I mean, a free society, you should never get in the way of what's it called, the mutual, I always get these words mixed up, but the benefit of mutual exchange. So in a free market, you would want, for example, you brought up immigration, you want immigrants to come in. The only thing the government should really look at is, you know, are they criminals? Are they, you know, basically getting in the way of that is getting in the way of free trade. So there are lots of things. So it's not just people who come and want to cut grass, you know, it's also doctors from foreign countries who would provide competition. So we absolutely believe in that. You know, my friend was telling me the other day, the AMA, you know, they didn't like the fact that doctors were coming from India or other places because it was providing competition to the doctors in the United States. And what happens when you have competition? Well, prices go down, but innovation and ingenuity goes up. So people still produce good products, but competition and cooperation is actually really beneficial, and the people end up winning, and that's how free market works. So I hope that was.
Okay, 2 minutes. Republican?
The movement of labor, is that correct?
Yes.
Can you be a little more specific?
Well,
Thank you.
right now we really
So this is an immigration question?
well, for employment purposes, that I could, if I own a business, that I could
Okay.
appoint workers, employ them, you know,
Okay.
not US citizens, or like that they don't immediately
Okay.
have, like I could just, for example, recruit from any country I want and bring them over and get them legally to work.
Absolutely. absolutely, as long as they come through the proper channels. And
That's not the, it's not free, we don't have free movement of libertarians, just to be clear. That's not what the United States has. You come and you apply for any reason to come to the country. What I'm suggesting as a business owner, that I can just say, I need these workers, I want them, I have jobs for them, great.
And,
That's the free movement of labor.
okay,
Get your 2 minutes.
all right, then I will rest the free movement of labor. As to what I believe I understood. In a perfect world where people are not nefarious, that'd be swell. I mean, same thing with immigration. If people in this world are not nefarious, it would be swell. But what happens when you have an extremist in, let's say, Turkey, coming over saying he's going to he's going to help on a farm or something, and he is portraying himself as having a certain skill. So if we just bring him over without going through the proper channels, it can cause issues. He can be coming over here to, for instance, grow marijuana or commit an act of terror. And there's a reason why we have these channels in place. And it's not just to be evildoers. It's not that I'm saying evildoers, I think we're exceptional. But there is a reason for them to be in place, and that is to prevent nefarious people from coming into this country.
Okay, I'd like to take another audience question over here.
Thank you. Anthony Snow, I'm the general studies major. This question is mainly for the Republicans. You mentioned about great power, great responsibility, and helping out with dictatorship and whatnot. But what about in 2000 when President Bush, while running, specifically stated that America's job is not to bring democracy to other countries in the world?
Well, no, I mean,
It's 2 minutes before the next 2 minutes over here.
well, in this, I mean, I understand what you're saying. And I personally agree with that, but the issue is that the countries that need democracy the most are the ones that need the help the most. I mean, we look at Syria.